Welcome back to our live stream. I hope you enjoyed your break. And here's our next guest. Can you please state your name and all of your titles and introduce yourself and all of your organizations that you want to promote?
Thank you, Tulai. Thank you for inviting me to be here. And I am Reverend Dr. Sweetie Ann Lars, but I go by Ann, I go by Sweetie, I go by whatever you can remember. I am here representing LIPSIS, an organization that is dedicated to domestic violence survivors. The acronym stands for Living in Pain, Suffering in Silence. Living in Pain, Suffering in Silence. And the reason that I thought that this organization would be very helpful to women and other survivors, because of course we know that women aren't the only survivors, but I thought it would be helpful because many times the shame, the embarrassment, the isolation, and all of the things that are associated with domestic violence go unheard or swept under the rug because people don't want to share their story or stories. I have my own story. Yes, I am a domestic violence abuse survivor, and I was fortunate because I had a professional career, I had funds, I had a car, I could get away from the abuse from my previous husband. But I know that many women are not that fortunate and they have to live in pain and suffer in silence. So that is why I thought that the organization would meet a need, and more specifically to women who live in the rural community.
And something I wanted to ask you specifically is what are some of the challenges that women in the rural communities face versus people in more of a bigger city like Shreveport or Bossier?
I'm glad you asked me that question because that is something that is really in my spirit and on my heart. And I guess sometimes when you are privileged to some degree to have a career, to have financial resources, you forget about the other people who are not as fortunate. And so when I moved back to Louisiana after completing my career in Michigan and Ohio, I began to look at my surroundings that I grew up in through a different set of eyes. And I saw the isolation. I saw the geographical distance between the homes. And so I believe that the Lord laid on my heart this particular acronym to describe what was happening to these women and their families, or men for that matter, and the families in the domestic violence cycle. And so the acronym was VIPER. They are experiencing verbal abuse, the abuse of isolation, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, and the retaliatory abuse. All of those things are, I want to say, personified when you're in the rural community because you lack access to services.
I do like that acronym. I think it's very ingenious to come up
This
with
is a
that.
God idea. This is a God idea. I take no credit. It just dropped in my spirit, and I had a visual image of what vipers do, and that's when you're trapped in the cycle of domestic abuse. That's what happens to you. Your life is squeezed out of you. You're poisoned by your toxic environment, and so just thinking about all of that made me want to speak out and see if there was something that I could do to help the women and the families that are involved in that vicious cycle.
So, what services do you provide in Keithville?
In Vivian.
In Vivian, I apologize. I'm not from Louisiana, so I mix up all of
But
the
that's
small
okay
towns.
because
So
this
I'm
is
so sorry.
no, I just live in Vivian, but what we provide is applicable to any of the rural communities. And doing my research, sometimes when you live in the metropolitan areas, you think that the whole United States of America is metropolitan and suburban. It is not. The majority of the United States is rural.
Yes.
And so I'm like, oh my goodness, then that means that there are I guess I'll use this big word, a plethora of people in the rural communities that lack access to services. When I was thinking about that, just a simple thing as your cell phone.
Yes.
Your cell phone doesn't work everywhere, so if you're in a crisis in a rural community, you have no signal. You have nowhere to run. You have no resources. So there you are, and there are so many family ties in the rural community. So sometimes the people that you have to reach out to for services are family members of the perpetrator. So what do? You have nowhere to go. And I can only just imagine a woman with her children running through the woods, because if you've gone down any of the rural communities, the distance between the homes can be a mile, a half a mile, or even longer. So you have to stay there and deal with the situation. And so not only everybody then is a family affair at that point. Let me say it that
Yes.
way.
And something that you have brought up in task force meetings is there's a lot of barriers for domestic violence survivors to call the police. One of it is the cell phone, and I think you had mentioned that one of it is the distance that the police have to travel in order to get to them.
Absolutely. I'll just take my own community, for instance, in Vivian. Now, we are fortunate that we have a full-time 24-hour police force. We're also fortunate that we have a fully staffed hospital at North Caddo Medical Center. But the surrounding towns in the northern part of the parish, they do not have a full-time police force at the magnitude that Vivian does. So they depend upon the Caddo Parish Sheriff Department for their support services. And the Sheriff Department does a fine job, but they can't be everywhere because they are the Caddo Parish Sheriff Department, and they're responsible for all of Caddo Parish. So another thing, Tulai, is that someone said, well, let's get a domestic violence shelter. I'm like, well, who's not going to know where it is?
Yeah. That is a big barrier in small towns because everyone knows where everything is. Everybody knows where everybody lives. And that becomes a barrier for people to go to a shelter because everyone will find out where it is.
That's exactly right. And by the time I call you, and then you call Project Celebration, or you call Vicky over at the Gingerbread House, well, it's going to take some time because of the distance, at least 45 minutes to an hour, before the taxi or whatever transportation you are sending gets to the victim. And by that time, anything could happen.
Yes. And that's why we do appreciate the work that you are doing over there. And so what advice would you give to somebody who's hesitant to reach out because of these barriers?
Well, I try not to give advice. I try to give some resources and some information, because many times
that's an amazing way to approach it, actually.
yes, it is, because what happens, and you all know this, you've been doing this for a number of years, what happens is the person returns sometime to the scene of the crime, and sexual abuse is criminal. And so they come back to the scene of the crime, and then you become vilified as the villain because you are telling them to call Project Celebration. They'll come for you. Call the Gingerbread House. Call this, call that. So they don't do that, and then they tell the assault person, well, I would leave, or I could go because Tulai told me to call. Oh, okay, here we are with another situation.
Yeah.
So I just tell them, here's some resources. If you are in a situation, you need to reach out to these resources, and they will help you to get to the next level of where you are trying to go. So, I mean, I could tell them more, but I've tried to stay in my lane and not give out information that may be counterproductive or may make bad matters worse.
Yes, that's actually amazing advice. I never thought of it that way, but thank you for your input. And so let's say a victim just leaves a domestic violence situation. Um, how, what is step one for you to approach them? How do you connect them to resources after you present it to them? What is the next step in Vivian?
Well, I'm fortunate to be on the Cattle Bossier Domestic Violence Task Force with you and other organizations that offer an abundance of services that can help just about any situation. And so the Northwest Louisiana, I know they've all been here, so I'm not going to run down the list, but the Cattle Bossier Domestic Violence Task Force is a collaborative partnership that has multiple resources to help. So my first step would be to pull out my directory and say, let's go through the directory and see which one of these organizations best fit your situation, and then make the connection that way. That would be the first step that I would take.
That's awesome. So, what are do you provide counseling services, or do you provide spiritual help because you are a reverend?
I do provide spiritual help. I don't provide counseling services, even though I have a certification as a school counselor. As you know, school counseling is much different than psychiatric counseling or psychological counseling, and we have to be very careful, even from the spiritual or the clergy perspective, not to overstep our boundaries and breach our ethical code of conduct in counseling people.
Yes.
Because when people are in crisis, sometimes what you say just sinks in and soaks in on a sponge basis, and then they go out and make a decision, and you're held liable for that. So my way of doing it is, if it's a psychiatric or psychological situation, then I will refer them out to the credentialed people. But what I can do is, from the clergy perspective, I can pray for you, I can help you with finding resources, but when it gets beyond that, then I try to connect them with the correct people.
I think that that's a great way to approach it. Another thing that I wanted to ask you is, what do you think are some, not you, but some other clergies pushback on actually referring victims out? Because I've seen a lot of situation where somebody is on a pastoral staff that will not refer them out to another, or refer victims out to another source that can give them psychological help. They won't refer them to a shelter. In fact, they'll actually discourage them from leaving if that's necessary. What do you think is some clergy's holdback from giving proper resources to seek out help?
You know, Tulai, I don't know. I think that sometimes, this is just my personal opinion, certainly I stand to be corrected, but I think sometimes, I don't know if we quite have internalized the Jesus methodology. I think if we internalize the Jesus methodology in our ministry, our pastoral care, he was able to do some things that we cannot do because we are not Jesus. And I think that sometimes the pastors, in their desire to help, are not helping because they don't have the tools. And let me just add this. Seminary training is not psychological or psychiatric training.
Yes.
And I think they are relying on the scriptures, and well, they should. But you have to recognize when you have gotten in over your head, and telling someone, using the scripture as a weapon to make someone feel guilty because they are in an abusive situation, and not giving them the resources so that both of the people, we're not saying get a divorce tomorrow, but both of the people need some type of psychiatric or psychological or marital counseling which perhaps the pastor cannot do or maybe should not do because sometimes it may be a close relative. So you have to be able to bridge that gap and know when you need to refer out
Yes.
and
I
not
think
use the
that's really
Bible as a
good.
weapon. Beating people over the head with the Bible is so not what clergy should be doing.
Thank you for your input. So, do you work for a church as well, or are you just a reverend over Lipsis?
Well, I am a pastor at Reeder Chapel CME Church, located at 580 Airport Road in Vivian, and I spend my time there with the flock and in the community. I consider myself a community-based pastor. The church outside of the walls is the church that I believe would be what Jesus would want us to do. So I spend time working in the community. Yes, I do the regular pastoral duties, but there's so much out in the field that can be done. And I think that if we are looking to model Jesus' behavior, I don't see that he spent a lot of time inside. I see that he had a social worker side to his ministry.
I think that's a great way to put it, that Jesus was always active in the community and he was always trying to reach people outside of the religious crowd, and he was actually judged by the religious crowd for trying to reach as many people as he could outside of buildings. So I think that's a great way to put it.
Well, that's why I just feel that way. I feel that, how about let's be the church, because we are the only church that some people will ever see. They may never step across the threshold to your respective congregation, but they see what you do, they hear what you say, and that is the church universal, what people are doing to help the least of these. And there are a lot of scriptures to support that, and sometimes, too, like, we want to jump over all of that part.
Yeah.
But we can't jump over that part. We have to do that part as well. Feeding, like this ministry, the 5 loaves and
5 loaves and 2 fish.
Okay, I was getting ready to say something else. Thank you.
No
5
problem.
loaves and 2 fish. And that is a part of the Jesus ministry. He speaks specifically to that,
Yes,
about
he
feeding
does.
the hungry and like the gingerbread house over there, providing shelter and so forth and so on, and then the other entities that are involved in the community. So that is the work that I like to do, and if I can connect people with other resources, then I feel that I have at least done my part in terms of the ministry. The preaching is 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30, and I would say, well, I would rather see a sermon than hear one.
That is an amazing way to put it. I love how you speak, and especially in regards to the Word of God. And we thank you so much for being here. And Vicki, do you have any questions coming from the audience?
I don't have one there, but I was just wondering, being in a small community, I say small, people-wise,
Yes.
but the distance, like you said, between homes and such, but have you ever encountered someone you've helped with resources at Walmart or one of the local stores, or encountered their abuser and they knew that you had helped? Have you ever had a positive or a negative interaction in that small setting?
No, I have not. Usually, the support that we give is, I guess, anonymous to some degree, and they don't share a lot about their abuser. They are just telling me that, well, I'm in a situation and I can see some of the physical signs of their abuse, and they want to know where can they go, what can they do. Many times they are forced into homelessness because when you look at the data regarding the socioeconomic status of women in particular, as you well know, I'm preaching to the choir, but let me have a verse. The disparity between the earning income level of the households, male, female households, is a wide gap. So when the women are forced to leave the home and they're not the primary breadwinner, then that places them in a semi-homeless state. And so some of that means that they have to go back if they can't find suitable employment or housing or resources.
So I think in the time we have left, I wanted to ask you if someone wanted to reach out to you, reach out to Lipsis, reach out to your church, what phone numbers can they call? Or what is a great way to get in contact with you via email, social media, or phone number?
Well, we have lots of phone numbers, but I'm going to try to give you the one that I know either it'll be a recording or a real person. I want to give you my personal cell phone number, and that number is area code 440-935-0376. Area code 440-935-0376. I know that's an unusual area code, but I lived in Ohio for a long time, and everybody has that number, so I have not ported over to a 318 area code. But you may also call me at the church. That is 318-375-3471. 318-375-3471. And here are the emails quickly. Email is R as in red, E, V as in Victor, D as in dog, R as in red, Lars, Lars, at Gmail. REVDRLARS at gmail.com. Either of those, the numbers or that email, will get you directly to me, and I have a personal rule that within 24 hours you will be called back or emailed. That 440 is also textable. You can text me at any time, and as I said, in 24 hours you will get a response from me.
And can you restate your church's name again for people who may have missed it, who just start tuning in?
Oh yes, the church is Reader, like are you a good reader? Reader Chapel CME Church, 580 Airport Road, Vivian, Louisiana, 71082.
Thank you so much for all that information.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us in our live stream for
I'm
this
so
segment.
happy to be here.
And thank you for still watching our live stream if you're still on, and we will see you in the next segment.
Thank you.
Welcome back to our live stream. And today I have Detective Kelly Downey with me because I could remember her name and her title, unlike other people, and I don't want to mispronounce names. So, welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, like, what do you do? What office are you a part of so I don't butcher it?
I am Detective Kelly Downey. I am with the Bossier Sheriff's Office in Bossier Parish, Louisiana. I am a part of the domestic violence unit within the detective's office for the Bossier Sheriff's Office.
That is awesome. So, just from a legal perspective, since you do work for government agencies, what steps do you take after a domestic violence call is given?
Well, a domestic violence call is obviously going to be an immediate response that is initially going to be handled by patrol, our patrol office, and very specifically the patrol deputies. Okay, so they're going to be the actual first responders. Each and every case with the Bossier Sheriff's Office, not only the domestic violence cases, but also what we classify as family trouble nonviolent, is assigned to the domestic violence unit, which is composed of myself and Detective Stephen Mackey. Those cases, when you are looking at the domestic calls itself, and I'll just break them off for you. In the domestic calls themselves, our patrol is they are the front line, they are the first, they are the getting the initial photos, getting the initial statements, getting, if possible and applicable, the arrest that is necessary to stop the violence immediately. Our cases don't stop there because our cases are more than just that one single incident. Domestic violence, as we all know, is not a single incident. It is comprising
Yes.
of multiple actions, multiple things that have not been reported to law enforcement. And so that is just one part. So patrol takes the very initial. In all cases, they take the initial report. With domestic violence, and very clearly speaking, when an incident happens, the person's obviously in trauma. And when you look at trauma-informed victim interviews and just trauma in general, our bodies are amazing in so many different ways. The body tries to protect itself, and so you don't have full function of your body. You have your gross motor skills only. You are purely in survival mode. And with that being said, your memory is not 100%. And it's not
Yes.
because you're not remembering or you're trying to make stuff up. It's because your body's in a trauma. So when you're looking at trauma-informed victim interviews, after 24 hours or a sleep cycle, then you regain you are at 85% of memory of what happened. 2 sleep cycles,
Yes.
you're at 95%. So you're going to lose 5% forever, all right?
Yeah.
So we conduct a secondary interview with the victim at that 24-hour mark. And we are putting in a lot of pieces of the puzzle that you're not able to get at the patrol function. The patrol function, you are trying to get the immediate, make the trauma stop. Get to the PC, what's called PC, or probable cause, to make the arrest. And then it comes to us. Additionally, unfortunately, at the same time, we see a lot of children that are involved in domestic violence situations. You have children in the house, you have children that are witness, you have children that have witnessed a lot of the nonviolent portions of domestic violence. So we partner with the Gingerbread House, and as a witness to a violent crime, they are eligible not only to be forensically interviewed by Gingerbread House, but they are also eligible for services at Gingerbread House. I highly encourage each of our victims to do this. We are not going to stop domestic violence. We can make it stop for one person. We can make it stop for, every person that we can come in contact with. But my soapbox for many years has been, if we don't do something with these children, we are simply identifying our victims and suspects 15 years from now.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you actually brought up victims of childhood trauma, as well as adults and having cognitive memory problems while the incident is going on. And this is something that I barely share, but that's one of the reasons why my memory is so bad, because I suffer from head trauma due to my father beating me in the head. And that's why, I have trouble remembering ranks, titles, names, locations that people are from.
And it's just
you know.
confusing.
Yeah, and it's hard to keep it all straight.
Mm-hmm.
But how important do you think it is for police officers and deputies to be trained in memory loss problems that victims may have due to trauma?
Well, the Attorney General's office, very specifically last year, trauma-informed victim interviews has been a very hot topic for teaching law enforcement. The Attorney General's office last year traveled throughout the state, and my superiors will tell you, when I feel passionate about something, I will stomp my feet and do all those kind of things to force,
Yeah.
I should say this word force, to encourage additional trainings. And so last year, the Bossier Sheriff's Office sent all of the what's called field training officers, so all the corporals that are responsible for training all of the newly assigned personnel into patrol, they went to the trauma-informed victim interview class put on by the Attorney General's office.
That's actually really great.
So I'm gonna boast on our sheriff. I'm gonna boast on the Bossier Sheriff's Office. Because I've been partnered with the Family Justice Center since the inception. It's almost 5 years now. So the Bossier Sheriff's Office has 2 personnel in the Family Justice Center. So it's a one-stop shop for victims, or should I say survivors of domestic violence, because that's where we are ultimately trying to get them to be. So, with that partnership, with that everything that's incurred, we can move from incident to secondary interviews to having moving into receiving additional services that is not within the scope of law enforcement. I would love to fix everybody's problems. However, I am law enforcement, and so I may not know the answers, but I will get you the answers, and that's going to be through the Family Justice Center.
And I think it is amazing that y'all share an office space with the Family Justice Center, so it does become like a one-stop shop where victims can come in. So can you also talk a little bit more about the Family Justice Center, because their representative couldn't make it today?
Yes.
So.
Sure. The director is a lady by the name of Jerry Bowen, and she and I both have been.
Shout out to her. We love her.
Shout out to Jerry Bowen. She was amazing. Obviously there's needs for survivors beyond the scope of law enforcement. And it's not all going to be within the confounds of law enforcement. So, I can't fix all the problems, but I can give you the answers. So when they come into the office, and Detective Mackey and I both ourselves, if the person is wishing to have a protective order, then we will actually work that with them, simply because when you are writing out the allegations portions of a protective order, first and foremost, that is going to be the first time that they have seen their story in black and white. And there's a lot of emotions with that. But that within itself, it becomes their first opportunity to write down very specifically, very detailed, the events of the actions as to why they're there. So, it in essence becomes a written statement for us. We can help them work through a lot of that process, perform the data entry portion of the protective order. And
Yeah.
the reason why we love protective orders so much is because it gives us teeth. A lot of times you have people, that's their home. Okay, well, I can't make you leave your home, but if I have a judge's orders telling you that you're not going to be at this house, if you come back to the house, then we have repercussions that can be taken and to remove the perpetrator and the person to be back in safety. It is the first time, a protective order is the very first time that a survivor has stood up and said no more.
Yes.
And to watch that journey from victim to survivor, and not only do they have that, but they have their case agent, myself or Detective Mackey, they have the Family Justice Center, they have, and I've heard it described a million times by different survivors, they have their army behind their back. From being completely alone to having an army behind their back, because not only with us in the Family Justice Center, but we are also partnered with the District Attorney's Office, and the District Attorney's Office has the Victims Advocate Coordinator. So from prosecution side to advocate side to the District Attorney side, they have an entire support system throughout the entire process of not only the arrest, but the adjudication process of the conviction as well.
Yes, and something that I can just tell from getting to know you a little bit through the task force is you really care about the victims. You have a quirky sense of humor, but you really care about the survival of the victims, and you care about their emotional state, their psychological state.
Mm-hmm.
I have come across a lot of victims that, and this was not in Bossier Parish or Shreveport,
Mm-hmm.
it was mainly out of state because I was able to go to a women's retreat in California for domestic violence survivors, and I was able to hear stories from people from all over. And something that they almost commonly brought up is how either a deputy or a police officer would brush off their story under the rug and side with the abuser so they have a bad taste in their mouth for someone in uniform. So when you come across a victim who may be hesitant because you are in uniform, how do you break those walls down to be able to gather your information and give them resources because you actually do care?
You know, I've been doing domestic violence only for about almost 5 years now, and throughout that process, you know, not only is patrol your very first function as far as the immediate trauma, but we always don't start with just immediate traumas. We start with what we call family trouble nonviolence.
Okay.
It's just the yelling and the screaming, and you know, throughout the years of doing this, there's been an evolution within the sheriff's office, within the people I work with. You know, they believe in our cause. They believe in our purpose. They believe in our domestic violence unit. And they believe it because they've seen what it does. You know, we have to understand, you know, I am a type A personality, okay, and I get that. I'm probably a type AAA. You know, and we have, you know, psychologists have labeled types of personalities because everybody's a little bit different. And, you know, so what is very hard and difficult for law enforcement sometimes is, you know, not understanding why people make the choices that they make, okay, because it's not the decision that we would make. You know, I would not tolerate certain things happening to me, all right?
Yes.
But the biggest part of what has been learned throughout law enforcement is this is not our journey. And so we can't make decisions for them. I don't make decisions for a single survivor. I support them in the decisions that they make. So throughout the past 5 years is that, you know, they've learned the value of our unit. They've learned the value of being able to have that reassurance, giving victims the confidence of the follow-up that's going to be given on. And so when you believe in what you're doing, you elude you're able to elude confidence into the victim. You're able to elude, you know, trust into them. You know, do I have an incredible amount of passion for what I do? Absolutely. You know, we all know the statistics, 1 in 4, right?
Yes.
So, you know, I will tell you that there's 3 women in this room, and so in this room it would be 3 and 3, and that's all I'm going to go into that. So,
Yeah.
so you know, we have an ability. You know, when Detective Mackey came and joined our group as well, you know, I can teach him anything in the world. You know, what made him almost perfect for what he does in the very beginning was the fact that he knows how to use empathy. He knows how to understand. We don't have to agree with what's happening in a person's life to be able to understand and help them through it. You know, and the same thing has happened with our patrol unit. They believe in our unit and they believe in the ability. All right, they know firsthand that, you know, when they're going out on a domestic or when they're going out on a family trouble nonviolent, that they have the ability to plant the seed that there's help out there, and when they're ready for it, they will receive everything that they've ever needed.
I love that approach, and I think that it's very important for victims to know that that help is out there when they are ready to leave. And I guess that is something that I have struggled with constant domestic violence in my own family, is not being frustrated as to why the victim will not leave. In this case, it was my family members. But being okay to just put the resources out there and say, I'm here for you when you are ready, you know?
When you're looking at, and let's just give a metaphor that somebody would understand, okay? If
Yeah.
a person was on drugs, you know, the persons around them cannot want enough for them to get out of drugs. And so there's no amount of words we can speak, there's no amount of encouragement we can speak, there's nothing that we can do to make them want to get off drugs.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing for domestic violence. I can't want enough for a person to leave their situation. All right. But again, it's not my duty to judge. Okay. Because again, this is their journey. So I would not be able to push a grain of sand across a desk to have a person leave that situation. But when they are ready to leave that situation, together we can move mountains.
Yes.
All right. So it's literally not my journey. And, there's plenty of times that when you have a situation, people ask the question all the time, why don't they leave? All right, well, it's very simple. Their fear of the unknown is greater than the fear of the known because, as we've spoken about the fact that this is not a single event, this is not a single process, there's not a single anything. They know they will be beat, but if they leave, they may not know how they're going to feed their children the next day.
Yes.
So there's a lot of fear that I cannot overcome for anybody. So just simply allowing themselves, through the Family Justice Center to safety plan to have their plan ready. So then when they are ready, we can move those mountains.
Yeah, I think something Miss Petrina from PCI said at the clergy training was that, like, when they leave, where do they go? With $3 in their pocket and a car full of kids and a dog, like, where are they going to go if they have no resources? And I
Exactly.
think a lot of people, when you start asking them that question, it really gets them to think, like, where would I have sent them if they were leaving? And I think I'll be using your drug addict analogy as well. So
And it's just a way of people for understanding. And again, the fear is the
Yes.
fear is more than just the fear of being physically abused, sexually abused, mentally abused. The fear is, as a mother, we have an overpowering need to provide for our children. And, if I had to take physical abuse to make sure that my child had a roof over their head, what would my choice be? I've never been put in that position, so I don't know how to answer that. But I do understand that I cannot make all their fears go away. It's when
Yes.
they work through the process of leaving, they understand that they have the resources behind them, not only law enforcement if necessary, but Project Celebrations and the Family Justice Centers.
Yes.
And there's a lot of great entities in Shreveport-Bossier area.
Yeah.
And let me step back into when you were talking about the mistrust in law enforcement.
yes.
I don't remember if you remember last year during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, there was a billboard that came out, and it was the Bossier Sheriff's Office, Bossier City Police Department, Shreveport Police Department, Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office, Caddo DA's Office, Bossier DA's Office, Family Justice Center, Project Celebration, and some law enforcement officers. And we were all standing there, and we were posed behind, it was a mock victim, and it said, "We have your back." And that was a brainchild of mine from last year. I was at there was an annual conference from the Women and Children's Unit,
Yes.
and one of the classes was, why don't they report? Okay, well, that's one of the things I have to report in my grant is the number of persons that have been victims of domestic abuse but has not reported in law enforcement. The number one thing was fear of law enforcement itself.
Yeah.
And I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and went, not in Bossier Parish, not in my parish, because I have a lot of pride in my parish. I have a lot of pride in my sheriff. I have a lot of pride in my direct and supervisors, because that's not how we work. That's not how we do things in Bossier Parish. My sheriff literally puts 2 full-time people into nothing but domestic violence and violation of protective orders. That's not how we work. That's not how we do things. And so it woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, not in my parish. And that was the brainchild behind that. So the we've got your back for victims of domestic violence. When you're ready to step out, we're ready to step up for you. You want to talk about
Yeah.
passion? Let me step up for you.
Yeah.
I promise you I have your back. Going back to the trauma-informed victim interviews, okay?
Yes.
I'm getting into the secondary secondary interviews, and that's just the first thing. When you look at a homicide, you don't have a victim to testify in a homicide case, in a murder case. You do not have a victim to testify. Your victim is dead. So how do we get prosecutions? Well, it's evidence-based prosecutions. And so that's how we've moved domestic violence investigation into Bossier Parish for about the past 5 years now. It's evidence-based prosecution. So if the person, if we have no ability to have that person to testify, then the evidence alone can stand for itself. That's multiple reasons as to why we interview the children through Gingerbread House. We have the forensic interview for these little tiny witnesses of the violence, of what they've had to endure. The spectacular interviewers that can testify for the children. So we have not only the secondary interview, but we have the tape statement of the children. Sheriff bought us a fabulous camera system a couple of years ago. It's an alternate light source camera that can actually photograph bruising that is not visible to the naked eye.
Oh, that's
so I
awesome.
can actually get those fingerprint marks from strangulation cases. I can get the evidence that is needed to have those good prosecutions.
And I think that is important to kind of look at it as just because the victim doesn't want to go forward, that the evidence can go forward.
Exactly.
To speak for itself. So we're running out of time. Vicki, do we have any questions?
No questions from the audience. And I wanted to ask though, you mentioned the fear of calling law enforcement, and because for so long we had heard, well, we're just going to take you both to jail.
Okay, well, that's that is my absolute pet peeve, and makes me want to scream from the mountaintops. Is dual arrest.
Yeah.
And we have a very low percentage of dual arrest. But I think training for that. The patrol deputies understand that when you have a dual arrest, that you have re-victimized your victim. Every once in a blue moon, there is a dual arrest, and it's not because of defense or self-defense. It is very separate actions. So we fight very hard not to do dual arrests. And the state of Louisiana within itself asks us to identify what's called predominant aggressor. If you are in my face and you are doing something and you are, you're the Strangulation Act, don't expect me to not fight back, to not be able to free myself. So, we do try very hard. There's a lot of wounds that a person can have that is very indicative to self-defense. And so we try very hard. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. Are we human? Absolutely. Do we try very hard on domestics? Absolutely. Because we do not wish to re-victimize victims.
Well, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your day to come. We are very honored, and we're just happy for all of our guests who have come to interview. Like, literally, when I was planning this and sending, emails out, I was hoping that maybe 3 would show up, and then so many people wanted to show up that we had to extend our time. And so we're very grateful for you, and we're very grateful for all of our guests who have come. And thank you for the audience for watching. So we will have this live stream recorded after it's not live anymore on YouTube. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So.
Welcome back. Our final segment of our interviews today. Thank you for joining in. If you watch these later, thanks for finding us and investing the time into learning the resources that are available in Shreveport and Bossier. Our next guest, I've known a long time. I moved to Shreveport. I'll give you a little background. And Chris Barney, which was Anglin at the time, was my best friend. And we were about 10 years old. And lost touch, as most people do that young, moving around and changing. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, year and a half, I hear this voice that I know, and I start following her on Facebook, probably borderline stalking, and I realize this is my friend, and that we've both experienced trauma through domestic violence.
Yes.
And that, I think that just shows it can happen to anybody, and it happens to more people than you know, and you can't just look at somebody and say, that's a victim, or
Right.
she's a victim, or he's a victim. Anybody is susceptible.
Yes.
And perpetrators can be absolutely anybody.
Anyway.
And that's what's so, I don't want to use the word amazing because it's not. It's so scary what happened in your situation. So I'm going to just let you give your story as much as you care to speak and talk about. And then I'll just ask questions randomly,
Okay.
or Tula will ask any that come in. And so,
Okay.
Chris?
Well, it's a really long story, but I'm going to try to cut it down. I married in 1993. I was young. I was 23. And in 1995, I had a baby girl. I actually married a Bossier City firefighter. He wasn't a firefighter at the time, but he was on his way, education-wise, to getting hired on the fire department. So Miranda was born in 95, and you know, I'd like to say that I knew that there were signs, and that really there were. After Charles and I married, even on our honeymoon, I knew that that something was not right, because he did a complete 180. A lot of people ask me, they say, well, didn't you see any red flags? Didn't you see that something was wrong? And my answer to that is no. I mean, I was 23. I was in love. I was completely smitten with this man, and he was charming. He had me from the get-go, and then he began to groom me, and it really wasn't until I signed that marriage certificate that he did a complete 180. It was just really scary. So 6 months after I married him, I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. Fortunately and unfortunately, I fell pregnant with Miranda in 95. And by 97, I guess Miranda was about 18 months old when I decided to leave the relationship. Now, I'm going to tell you, everybody knows that I was never physically abused by Charles. I was constantly verbally attacked and mentally and emotionally attacked. You know, an example, I had just had Miranda, and I was still nursing her. And he would tell me, I just really don't find you attractive. You need to lose some weight. And she wasn't even 6 weeks old. I mean, he knew better than that, but it was just tear down my self-esteem. And I certainly felt ugly. Who feels beautiful and sexy after having a baby
Right.
right off the bat?
Everything's out of shape.
Yes. So, and it just continued on and on. And then I found out that he had been seeing someone when Miranda was around, I don't know, a year old. And it was a fellow ambulance worker. I won't name the company, but he sent her flowers and he bought her candy. And then I got the bill. I got the bill because I was paying the bills, and here this stuff was. And I called and confirmed. And he admitted that they were just friends or what have you. So anyway, it kind of went downhill from there. When Miranda was about 18 months old is when I decided to leave, that I'd had enough. And that's because he embarrassed me just so awfully when we were on a trip together with the Bossier City Fire Department. He was playing softball for them. So when we were on our way home, I decided I can't do this anymore. And then when I told him it's time to go, because I owned our house, I owned it, and he was, he wasn't having it. He was upset. He was, then all of a sudden there's remorse, there's crying, there's pleading, and I said, no, I have given you chance after chance. You need to go. And then that is really when my life turned into an absolute nightmare. Throughout the day today, I've been listening to, why doesn't the victim just leave? A lot of it is fear. But when I made the choice to leave, my life became even more in danger. And Miranda's as well. Because then the stalking started, the harassing phone calls. There was never physical abuse, but it was constant phone calls at the office, at my place of employment. I almost got fired because of the constant phone calls. And it was up to me, Chris, you need to get a handle on him. He's disturbing the department. He would stalk me using the Bossier City ambulance and park right outside the courthouse where I worked in Caddo Parish. And it was up to me to document and keep documentation of everything that was happening. I was getting so many phone calls from him at home and at work. And even back then, I had a pager, but my family, my parents had to hire an answering service so that we could, because I couldn't keep up with all of I had to write everything down, and they documented every phone call that came through all the resources. And I hired an attorney, of course, and we were working to get him to stop harassing me. And to please, I called the police, I can't tell you how many times, filed police reports in Shreveport, because that's where we were living at the time. And I had police report after police report and all this documentation, because it was left up to me, the victim, which is it happens all the time. The burden of proof is always put on us to document and get everything in order to try to prove that there's a crime. And sure enough, I documented everything. My parents were wonderful. My mother's secretary, Christy, we all got together, and I had videotape. They transcribed everything into these big binders. It was a lot of work, a lot of late nights, especially for my parents, my mother. But we got enough evidence to have him convicted of stalking. He was arrested, and he was convicted. But the downside of that is it didn't stop him. He got to keep his job. And then life just seemed to spiral out of control for a while. There was a constant, when he posted bail, he was right back outside my house. I stood in my driveway and watched him drive around the corner and park right in front of my house. As if to say, you can't touch me, nothing you can do. I will never have to pay for anything.
He's brazen in his actions, just
Absolutely. I had restraining orders. And it wasn't until I met my husband, Jeff, and he actually met a new victim, and her name was Michelle, that there was a few months, I guess around maybe 8 months of quietness. He was trying to woo her. He had already declared his love for her. He wanted to marry her and moved into her house with her 2 daughters. And I was cultivating a new relationship with my husband. And after about 8 months, Michelle decided, this isn't good.
I don't feel safe. He was controlling. He was controlling her children, her money, her everything, her life. And then constantly showing up at work. And then when she finally told him it was time to go, he needed to leave. Then he started doing the same thing. Now, mind you, in the meantime, when I was fighting Charles, I fought him for 3 years or more. And Michelle and I both wrote letters and contacted the Bossier City Fire Department on countless times, called and was like, please, can you help us? Can you help me? Michelle called, and Charles had a conviction of stalking, and he started stalking her. She had restraining orders. She and I did everything right. And, he was always using Miranda. Children are their favorite tool. And he constantly used Miranda as a tool against me. He would take her, and then he wouldn't return her. He let his sister take her and hide her from me. And we had to call the police. I called my mother, my parents. They drove to Shreveport, and then we drove out to Bossier to try to find her, to go get her. Anyway, that's the kind of mental and emotional abuse that leaves lasting scars and seriously causes anxiety and PTSD. Like, it was horrifying. And this was 22 years ago, and I still suffer from trust, Miranda, she was, of course, the light of my life, my reason for living. And I tried to get him to help me co-parent in a peaceful way, and he wasn't having it. So, and then he met Michelle, and everything kind of started calming down, and then she broke up with him. And that's when disaster struck.
Because it's going to escalate.
Absolutely, and it did escalate. He started giving me a hard time, again, harassing me about Miranda, and, of course, stalking her, harassing her at home. She had restraining orders. The day before Michelle died, she stood in her driveway and called the police with her restraining order. And they let him go. At the time, I was in New Orleans because Charles, that's his daughter. He gets visitation. I fought like crazy for supervised visitation at least. And no, they gave him joint custody. And I was in New Orleans after I had completed a 6-year course for my deputy assessor's, association recertification or certification, and he had her, and then I called her that Tuesday night on January 12th, 1999, and to talk to her, to tell her, good night, and that I loved her, and that I'd be home soon. And when I called, Charles wasn't there at the house with her, and he had moved back in with his parents. Mm-hmm. And so Charles wasn't there. And so I told his dad, I will call back in an hour. She should be ready for bed, and she should be at home. He said, okay. I waited an hour and called back, and Mr. Sally answered the phone, and he immediately handed it to a police officer. Charles had killed our child. He shot her twice. And he shot and killed Michelle at her place of employment. And I can't even describe. I don't even want you to imagine the pain and the anguish of losing my 3-year-old daughter. And, I think if I hadn't had such an amazing support system, because I did, and most victims of domestic violence, they have no one. And they have no one because by the time that they have found the strength to leave. Everyone that they love and trust has left them because it's frustrating, right? It's frustrating for family members and friends to, why does she keep going back? Why does she keep going back? Well, I had I didn't have that. I had a support system. I had parents. I had, Jeff and I had just gotten married. We were married only 3 weeks when Miranda was killed. So I had amazing friends and family that supported me through all of this. And I just didn't have the support of the people who could have saved her. Now, I want to tell you, when Charles was convicted of stalking and harassing me, he was ordered by the judge to do at least 10 sessions with a certified psychiatrist. Okay? But for some reason and somehow, his parole, and he had to visit his parole officer once a week. Somehow or some way, his parole officer got that knocked down to just 1 week's worth of anger management. I'm not a fan of anger management. He needed psychological help. But the parole officer said, and I guess, I don't know, 22 years ago, how did they work that? But they did, and he just went and sat in a class for a week.
And I'm not going to say it's never anger is the issue, but I would say 99% of the time, anger isn't the issue because they're not angry with anyone except the person they're trying to control. And then it's a manipulating anger. It's not that they're really even angry with you, it's just their form of manipulation.
Absolutely. And what he was feeling, which most abusers feel, is that he was losing control. He was losing control of me and managing Miranda. And he had lost control of Michelle. Michelle had put her foot down and said, I'm not having this. So when he felt that grip slip, then he decided this is what I'm going to do. And of course, it's sometimes I don't know how to feel. First of all, let me just say this. I am so very thankful for our police officers and our sheriff's deputies and the trainings that are available now. I wish I had that.
Right.
I wish I had that 21 years ago, really. 22 will be January. And I wish that I had that amazing resource. Now, I had resources, but wow, Shreveport Bossier has come a long way. There's still a lot of work to do, I think, but they have made great strides.
We're on the right track.
Absolutely.
We're moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
And we won't go deep into it, but one of the unusual facts, and we heard about Gwen's Law earlier.
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What that is to you?
How that relates to me?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. Miranda died in 1999, and I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
2015, I was living in Florida at the time, and I was scrolling through Facebook like you do every Saturday morning, and I came across I think it was KTVS Channel 3. They were featuring a domestic violence murder, another murder, and ironically, it was Charles's brother Mike. Charles's brother Mike had murdered his wife, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so, of course, I was messaging everybody like, "Oh my gosh, is this my ex-brother-in-law, Mike Sally? Is this true? Please tell me he did not kill his little girl." So Gwen was Mike's wife, and that's how it relates to me. So her sister, Teresa, who is an amazing person and so strong, she fought our legal system and our judicial system to get Gwen's Law passed. So, you can do your research on Gwen's Law, but it basically states that there's a holding period, because what Michael did was he held his wife and little girl hostage the day before, I think, in his home at gunpoint. And Gwen managed to call 911. I think she went, to the bathroom and somehow or another, but they had been there for hours. And the police showed up and they arrested Michael for holding her hostage and his little girl at gunpoint. And he went to jail, posted bail, went and got a gun from his cousin, I believe, and kidnapped Gwen in the parking lot of the daycare center that her little girl went to, and took her out to a wooded area and shot and killed her with a shotgun, and then he killed himself. So both of the Sally men were not only abusers, because as far as I know, I don't know for sure, I don't think Gwen was physically abused as well. I don't know, I'm not 100%, so don't quote me on that, but they were both mental and emotional abusers. Fear was their greatest tactic. Once they planted that seed of fear, it festers, and you're terrified. I was terrified constantly for Miranda's life. I was constantly telling police, he's going to kill her. He threatens to kill her. He would call me in the middle of the night saying, I'm going to kill her, and then I'm going to kill myself. But I was still ordered to give him visitation, to hand over my child to this monster. So Gwen, I know she tried to leave. She tried to save her own child, because she literally got the little girl out of the vehicle. And then Gwen's Law, was developed, and I'm so thankful for that. Teresa did something that I didn't have the strength to do. And unfortunately, it took to 2015 for Louisiana to wake up and say, we need to do something about this. I mean...
Yeah, and with all that, we've spoke before, I think some verbiage needs to change. When you say you're a victim of domestic abuse, she gets slapped around, she gets fussed at or cussed at or called names, but it's just domestic abuse. But when you call them what they are assailants. They assault people. They rape people. They're rapists. And they are murderers. And I don't think we should have to wait till they murder someone to call them what they are.
Absolutely, Vicki. And we talked about that as well, and I agree. They are domestic terrorists.
Exactly.
Is what they are. And that's what Charles was. Mm-hmm. He terrorized everybody, especially everyone that tried to help me or tried to help Michelle. And, he left behind a suicide tape. And I've got the documentation in my possession that says, I did this out of revenge. I killed Miranda despite my mother, because she was such a strong force in trying to save Miranda and I. And, I did this because if I can't have Michelle, then no one else is going to have her. But yes, domestic terrorist.
That's going to be our new word.
Yeah.
We're running out of time quickly, and I could talk to you forever.
Absolutely.
And but I want to thank everyone for coming. I believe we have a short little clip coming up in a minute of us closing our event today, but I want to thank everyone for joining in and watching this on YouTube.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning into our live stream. If you've stayed until now, we hope it was very informative, and we hope we were able to shine light on all the resources that are available in the Shreveport-Bossier area. And we would like to thank all of our guests who have been able to come today out of their busy schedules. We thank you for continuously through your careers raising awareness against domestic violence. And again, please subscribe, like, and ring the notification bell of our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, we had to restart our live stream, so there is part 1 and 2 of our live stream, and we hope to see you again next year in October.
Thank you. I'm just going to say the same thing Tulai said. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all the organizations that attended, and a special thank you to the survivors that came to share their stories. That's a hard thing to do. And Five Loaves and Two Fish for sponsoring us and making this happen. It's a crazy year with COVID, but this is going to be our new thing, and we want you to come along for the ride and spread the word that we're not going to put up with domestic violence any longer.
Yes. So we will see you in our next video.